the giant cowboy who fell in love with the woman they called the beast in the sack. The sun hung low over the desert, casting long shadows across the barren plains. The town of Redstone was a place where hope seemed to have long since packed its bags. Dust choked the air, and the wind carried with it the scent of rusted metal and forgotten promises. Out here, life was cheap, and the people were tough. Survival was the only law that mattered. A figure appeared on the horizon, a lone rider on horseback. His silhouette was enormous, towering over the sparse landscape like a mountain in motion. The townsfolk looked up, squinting against the harsh sunlight, their eyes narrowing in both curiosity and caution. The rider was a man unlike any they had seen before. His broad shoulders seemed to stretch the fabric of his worn-out shirt, and his arms were thick with muscle, each vein bulging as though they had stories of their own to tell. His face was carved from stone, with a beard that framed his square jaw and eyes that seemed to burn with a quiet intensity. He was a giant of a man, a cowboy known far and wide for his strength and his past. But it was not just his size that made people take notice. It was the weight of his reputation. His name was Ty Hardwick, and he had a history that could fill a dozen lifetimes. He was a man who had fought wars, both on the battlefield and within himself, and came out the other side with little more than scars and stories. As he rode into Redstone, the streets fell eerily silent. The sound of his horse's hooves echoed through the town, a rhythmic reminder of his arrival. People peeked out from behind curtains, their eyes filled with suspicion. They had heard of him, of course. Ty Hardwick wasn't just a cowboy, he was a legend. Some said he could wrestle a bull to the ground with his bare hands. Others claimed he had fought in wars that had shaped the very galaxy they lived in. To the folks in Redstone, he was nothing more than a giant who had come to claim whatever it was that he wanted. He dismounted in front of the saloon, his boots thudding heavily against the dirt. The man was like a force of nature, impossible to ignore. He adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and stood there for a moment, looking around, taking in the town. It was smaller than he had expected. The buildings were dilapidated, their paint chipped and peeling like old skin. There was no welcoming committee, no cheers or applause. Redstone was a town of survivors, and they didn't welcome strangers, especially ones with a past as dark as Ty's. As he stepped inside the saloon, the door creaked, and the chatter of the few patrons inside fell to a hush. They turned to look at him, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and unease. Ty walked up to the bar, his boots making a heavy sound on the wooden floor. The bartender, a thin man with a face that looked like it had seen too many sunrises, hesitated before speaking. "What'll it be, stranger?" he asked, his voice rough from years of smoke and liquor. Ty's eyes never left the bartender's face as he answered, his voice deep and steady. "Whiskey. Neat." The bartender nodded, sliding a glass toward him. Ty took it, tossing the drink back in one smooth motion. He didn't need to savor it. The burn was familiar, just like the roads he had traveled and the battles he had fought. "You know," the bartender said, cleaning a glass with a rag, "you're not welcome here." Ty raised an eyebrow, turning slightly to look around the room. A few faces turned away quickly, avoiding his gaze. There was one woman, though, sitting alone at a table in the back. She was tall, strong-looking, with dark, unkempt hair that framed her face like a wild halo. Her eyes, dark and guarded, never left him. Her name was Mara, and she was known to the locals by a nickname that no one ever dared to say aloud in front of her, the Beast in the Sack. The name had stuck after a violent incident years ago, and though no one had seen the full story, the whispers around town painted her as something dangerous, something untamable, but the cowboy wasn't one to be intimidated by rumors. Ty finished his drink and set the empty glass down with a soft clink. "I've never been one to heed warnings," he said, his voice low. The bartender nodded, but his gaze flicked nervously to Mara. "She's trouble, you know. They say she's been running from her past for a long time, but she's here now, and she's got a reputation, one that might just break you."
Ty didn't answer right away.
Instead, his gaze wandered back to Mara. She wasn't looking at him now, but he could feel the weight of her attention on him. There was something in the way she held herself, something raw and real. It was as if she had been hardened by years of suffering, yet still, she carried herself with a quiet strength that intrigued him. As the moments passed, the air in the saloon grew thicker, heavier. The cowboy could feel it, the tension that seemed to vibrate in the room like the hum of a drawn bowstring. The door swung open again, and a group of rough-looking men entered, laughing loudly and swaggering toward the bar. They were the kind of men who made their living by taking what they wanted, and they weren't particularly worried about who stood in their way. One of them, a burly man with a scar running down the side of his face, eyed Ty. "What's a big fella like you doing here?" he asked, his voice thick with mockery. Ty didn't flinch. He looked the man square in the eye and leaned against the bar. "I'm just passing through." "Passing through, huh?" the scarred man said with a grin. "Well, maybe you can help us out. We're looking for a little fun." Ty's eyes narrowed. He wasn't in the mood for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him no matter where he went. He glanced over at Mara, who hadn't moved, but her eyes were locked on him now, her expression unreadable. The man took a step closer to Ty, and that's when everything happened in a flash. The scarred man reached for his belt, but before he could draw his weapon, Ty's hand shot out like lightning, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it in one smooth motion. The thug yelped in pain, dropping the gun. "Not today," Ty muttered, shoving the man back toward his friends. They all froze, eyes wide. Ty stood tall, unshaken. The saloon was quiet now, the tension thick as the men backed off, muttering curses under their breath. Ty turned to the bartender, who was staring at him in shock. "I'll take another drink," he said quietly, his voice steady. But it was Mara's voice that caught his attention next, soft and steady but carrying an edge. "You really don't know what you're dealing with, do you?" T turned, finally meeting her gaze fully. "Maybe I don't," he admitted, "but I'm willing to find out." The next few days in Redstone passed quietly, but the tension in the air remained thick. Ty Hardwick had expected things to calm down, but there was something about Mara, the woman they called the beast in the sack, that lingered in his mind. He couldn't quite shake the feeling that there was more to her than the rumors painted. Despite the rough reputation the townspeople had given her, Ty could see the loneliness in her eyes, the weight of a past that no one seemed to understand. Mara kept to herself, avoiding the saloon and the bustling town square. She spent her time at the edge of town, near the cliffs that overlook the barren plains. Ty knew the place well. He'd spent many nights on those very cliffs, alone with his thoughts. But when he saw her there, standing tall like the land itself, he couldn't resist. He had to learn more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the sky, Ty made his way toward the cliffs. He found her sitting on a large rock, her back to him, staring out into the vast emptiness. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he stood at a distance watching her. She seemed different in the quiet of the evening, more human somehow. The rough edges of her reputation faded in the stillness of the moment. "You come here often?" Ty asked, his voice breaking the silence like a stone dropped into a pond. Mara turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting his. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly, as if she had already decided how this conversation would go. "This place isn't for people like you." "And what kind of people do you think I am?" he asked, genuinely curious. She scoffed and looked away, her gaze returning to the horizon. "The kind that thinks they know everything. The kind that thinks they can fix people like me." Ty felt a pang of frustration, but he didn't let it show. "Maybe I don't want to fix you," he said, taking a step closer. "Maybe I just want to understand you." Mara shifted uncomfortably. "There's nothing to understand," she said bitterly. "I'm just a monster in a world full of monsters." The words hit harder than Ty expected. He took another step, now standing just a few feet from her. "I don't believe that," he said, his voice steady. She finally looked at him, her eyes searching his face, trying to find the lie in his words. "You don't know me," she said softly. "You don't know what I've done. You don't know the things I've lost." Ty didn't say anything at first. He simply sat down beside her on the rock, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't know her past, but he could tell there was more to her story than the rumors. "I don't need to know everything," he said after a moment. "But I know what it's like to carry something heavy, to carry a past that you can't shake. I know what it's like to feel like you're never enough." Mara's gaze softened just for a moment. Then she stood up, brushing the dust from her pants. "Everyone has their burdens," she said coldly, "and everyone carries them alone." Ty stood up as well, his broad frame casting a shadow over her.
"Not everyone," he said firmly.
"I'm here, whether you want me to be or not. And if you need someone to carry that weight, I'm willing to share it." Mara didn't answer right away. She seemed to be weighing his words, as if considering whether or not to believe him. Then, without saying another word, she turned and started walking back toward town, leaving Ty standing there, still looking after her. The next few days were tense. Ty continued his work around town, fixing fences, helping the settlers with small tasks. He wasn't there to be a hero. He wasn't even sure why he had stayed in Redstone, but each time he passed the saloon or the town square, his eyes would seek out Mara. He couldn't help it. There was something about her, something raw and real, that he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as he passed by the saloon, he caught a glimpse of her walking toward the edge of town. Her long strides were purposeful, like she was trying to outrun something. Without thinking, he followed her. It didn't take long for him to catch up. "Mara," he called, stepping into her path. She stopped and turned, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What do you want now?" "I'm just trying to help," he said simply. "Help?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You don't even know what you're talking about. You think I need help? You think anyone in this town can fix me?" Ty stepped closer, not intimidated by her anger. "Maybe I'm not trying to fix you. Maybe I just want to be here, to be someone you can trust." Her expression hardened, and for a moment Ty thought she might walk away. But then she spoke, her voice softer than before. "You don't understand. I didn't choose this life. I didn't choose to be the way I am." Ty took another step toward her, his voice low and steady. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to stop carrying it all alone." Mara's eyes flickered with something. Regret, anger, perhaps even a hint of hope. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. She turned away, not saying another word. But this time, Ty didn't let her walk away. He reached out and gently grabbed her arm. "Mara," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you." She pulled away from his grasp, but she didn't walk off. Instead, she stood there for a moment, facing him with an unreadable look. "I don't need anyone," she whispered, though her words lacked conviction. "I've been alone for so long, I don't know how to be anything else." Ty's heart ached as he looked at her. He didn't know what to say, but he didn't need words. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He wasn't going to give up on her, not yet. Not when there was still so much left to uncover. "Maybe," he said quietly, "you don't have to be alone anymore." She stood still, her shoulders tense but not resisting. Ty could see the struggle in her eyes, the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of trusting someone again. But he also saw something else, a flicker of hope, a crack in the armor she had built around herself. Mara finally sighed and turned away. "We'll see," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Ty didn't push her further. He simply watched her walk back toward the town, her figure disappearing into the distance. He knew it would take time, but he also knew he had started something, a connection, a spark, that he wasn't ready to let go of. The days in Redstone grew warmer, the sun beating down relentlessly on the dry earth. Ty Hardwick had become a fixture in the small town, helping wherever he could. The settlers were starting to trust him more, especially after the incident at the saloon. They saw him as a protector, a giant with a heart that was surprisingly gentle for someone so feared, but no one, not even the townsfolk, could understand the pull he felt toward Mara. Mara, on the other hand, kept her distance. She hadn't spoken to him much since their last conversation, and Ty respected her space. But there was something in the way she looked at him when their paths crossed, something that suggested she wasn't as indifferent as she let on. She wasn't ready to trust him, but she was starting to open up, just a little. One afternoon, as Ty worked on fixing the town's fence, he noticed Mara on the outskirts, standing by the edge of the cliff again. Her figure was a silhouette against the orange sky, and for a moment Ty just watched her, wondering what went on inside her mind. She had a past that haunted her, and it was clear that it wasn't something she could easily forget. But there was something about her, something that made him want to protect her, something that made him want to stay. He put down his tools and made his way toward her, determined to have a real conversation this time. The sun was low, and the evening air was cool as he reached the cliff's edge. Mara didn't turn when she heard his approach, but she knew he was there. She always did. "What do you want, cowboy?" she asked, her voice softer than it had been in days. Ty stopped a few feet away from her, glancing out at the landscape. "I want to understand you," he said simply. "I want to know what's going on in that head of yours." Mara didn't answer immediately. She just stood there, looking out at the horizon as if the vast emptiness could offer her some kind of comfort. Finally, she spoke. "You don't get it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing for you to understand. I'm just a survivor. Nothing more, nothing less." Ty stepped closer, the ground beneath his boots crunching with each step. "Everyone's a survivor. Some of us just need a little help along the way." She turned to face him then, her dark eyes flashing with something. Anger, frustration, maybe even fear. "I don't need your help," she said harshly. "I don't need anyone." Ty stood still, not backing down. "Maybe you don't need help," he said, "but you could use a friend. And whether you like it or not, I'm here. I'm not leaving." Mara's jaw clenched, and for a moment Ty thought she might lash out. But instead she took a deep breath, as if trying to calm herself. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice quieter now, as though the fight had drained out of her. "I don't need to know everything," Ty replied. "But I know that you're not the person people say you are. You're more than just the past you're running from." Mara didn't answer. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the horizon, as if the setting sun could offer her some kind of escape. Ty wasn't sure if she heard him, but he wasn't going to walk away this time. Not without trying to get through to her. "I don't care what they say about you," he said gently. "What matters is who you are now, who you want to be." She stayed silent, but Ty could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fists clenched at her sides. It was as if she was fighting an internal battle, one that had nothing to do with him but everything to do with the walls she had built around herself. "I'm not asking you to forget," he continued. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to show you that you don't have to carry all this alone." Mara's breath hitched, but she didn't speak. For a long moment there was only the sound of the wind, rustling the dry grasses around them. Ty waited, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what would happen next. But then she spoke again, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. "You don't understand," she said. "You don't know what it's like to be used, to be betrayed by the people who should have protected you, to be cast aside like I was." Ty's heart sank. He could hear the pain in her words, the weight of everything she had endured. He knew what it was like to be betrayed, to feel like no one had his back. But this was different. This was something deeper, something more personal, and he wasn't going to run from it. "I don't know what it's like to be you," he said softly, "but I do know what it's like to carry something heavy, to feel like you're never enough, like no one will ever understand." Mara looked at him, then her eyes searching his face, looking for something. She wasn't sure what it was, but something inside her seemed to crack. Just a little. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask to be the monster everyone thinks I am." Ty stepped closer, closing the gap between them. "I don't think you're a monster," he said firmly. "I think you're someone who's been hurt, and that hurt has made you build walls. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment Mara just stared at him, her chest rising and falling with each breath. It was as if she was fighting with herself, unsure whether to let go of the anger that had kept her safe for so long. Ty could see it in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. Before she could say anything else, the sound of horses galloping reached their ears. Ty turned his head, his instincts immediately kicking in. The peaceful moment they had shared was shattered in an instant. A group of men appeared on horseback, their faces hidden behind bandanas. They were rough-looking, with weapons strapped to their sides. Ty could see the glint of knives and guns, and his heart raced. "These men are bad news," Mara muttered, her voice low. "They've been after me for a long time." Ty didn't hesitate. He reached for his gun, his hand steady. "Then it's time they learned not to mess with you." As the men rode closer, Ty could see the leader, a tall, scruffy man with a cruel smile, spurring his horse forward. "Well, well," the leader called out, his voice mocking. "Look what we have here. The infamous beast in the sack. And her little cowboy friend. I hope you're ready for a fight." Ty's jaw tightened. "I don't take kindly to threats," he said, his voice cold. Before the leader could respond, Ty lunged into action. He drew his gun faster than the men could react, taking out two of them with precise shots. The others hesitated, shocked by his speed and accuracy. Mara, too, sprang into action, drawing her own weapon and taking down another of the attackers. The two of them fought side by side, a seamless blend of strength and precision. It was the first time Ty had seen Mara in her element, brave, fierce, and unstoppable. The cowboy was amazed at her skill, realizing that she was no ordinary woman. She had survived everything life had thrown at her, and she wasn't about to back down now. When the last of the attackers lay on the ground, Ty turned to Mara. "You're not alone," he said again, his voice soft but firm. Mara met his gaze, a flicker of something, perhaps gratitude, perhaps something more, shining in her eyes. The sun was beginning to set over Redstone, casting the town in a warm golden light. Ty Hardwick stood at the edge of the town, looking out across the open plains. The wind had a gentle, almost calming feel to it now, the kind that whispered of new beginnings. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Mara had been quiet since the fight with the outlaws. They'd worked together, fought side by side, and come out victorious. But now that the danger had passed, there was a quiet tension between them. They hadn't spoken much, and Ty couldn't shake the feeling that Mara was holding something back, as though the battle had stirred up more than just the fight. He had hoped the fight would be the turning point. Maybe now she would see that she didn't have to carry her past alone. Maybe now she could see that she didn't have to be the beast she had called herself, that she could be more than the darkness she'd lived with for so long. Ty didn't know what the future looked like for him and Mara, but he knew he wasn't going to give up on her. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. He walked toward her small cabin at the edge of town, his boots thudding softly against the dirt. When he reached her doorstep, he hesitated for a moment. He could hear her inside, moving around quietly. It was always like this when she was alone, silent, like she was wrapped in her own thoughts, keeping the world at a distance. Ty knocked gently on the door, his heart beating in his chest. Mara opened the door slowly, her face unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him with those dark, stormy eyes that always seemed to hold 1,000 emotions at once. "Can I come in?" Ty asked, his voice calm but firm. Mara stepped aside without a word, allowing him into her cabin. It was small and simple, with a few worn chairs and a table that looked like it had seen better days. The air smelled faintly of wood and smoke, and the light from the setting sun streamed in through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Ty stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had hoped things would be different after the fight. He had hoped that somehow Mara would see that he wasn't just some cowboy passing through, that he wasn't here to fix her. He was here to stand beside her. "Mara," he began, taking a step toward her, "I know you're not used to this, to someone being here for you, but I am. I want to be here for you, not just because you need someone to fight beside you, but because I care about you." Mara didn't answer right away. She just stood there, her arms crossed over her chest as if she were trying to protect herself from the words he had just spoken. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "You don't know what it's like to carry everything alone, do you?" Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper. "To always be the one who has to keep moving, to keep fighting, because if you don't, you'll fall apart." Ty's heart ached for her. He had no idea what it was like to live the way she had, to feel like every step was a fight for survival, but he did know what it was like to carry a burden, to feel like you were never enough. "I do know," he said, his voice steady. "I've carried things that weigh heavier than anything you can imagine, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Not if you don't want to." Mara's eyes flickered with something, maybe fear, maybe hope, but she quickly pushed it down. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but Ty could see the walls she had built around her starting to crack. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been on my own for so long. I don't know how to let someone in." Ty took another step closer, this time closing the space between them. He reached out slowly, carefully, as if she might pull away at any moment. But she didn't. She stood still, her eyes watching his every move. "I'm not asking you to let me in all at once," he said gently, "but I'm asking you to let me be here, to let me be the person you turn to, even if it's just for a little while." The hard edges of her expression faded, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and for the first time, Ty saw a glimpse of the woman beneath the armor she had built. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ty reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it all at once. You just have to start. And I'll be right here, every step of the way." There was a long pause as Mara looked at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign of deceit. She didn't find any. For the first time, she let herself believe the words he had spoken. She let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything on her own. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been," Mara said quietly, "but I'll try. I'll try for you." Ty smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. He had known from the start that this wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that she was worth fighting for. "I'll take it one day at a time," he said. "We'll take it one day at a time." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke of understanding, of shared experiences, of two people who had fought their own battles but were now willing to fight together. Ty didn't know what the future held for him and Mara. They had both come from dark places, places that had shaped who they were, and the scars from those times wouldn't disappear overnight. But as he stood there with her, watching the last of the sunlight fade from the sky, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They didn't need to know what the future would bring. They just needed to know that, for the first time in a long time, they didn't have to face it alone. Mara took a deep breath and nodded, her voice steady as she spoke the words that Ty had been waiting to hear. "All right, cowboy. Let's see what happens next." Ty reached out and pulled her into a gentle embrace, his heart swelling with the quiet promise of a new beginning. They didn't need to know everything. They didn't need to have all the answers. But together, they would face whatever came next, one step at a time.